Hi, welcome to session 3 of the Summer Sustainability Summit. My name is Aileen Carroll, and I lead sustainability communications for One Click LCA here in North America. Today's session, we are going to be talking about scaling decarbonization with EPDs, and I'm so excited to get into the topics. We already aired 2 sessions today, so if you missed those, the recordings will be available. You should definitely watch those. They were full of great information. But today, right now, we will be talking to an action-packed lineup. We're going to hear from the Carbon Leadership Forum, Brightworks Sustainability, we'll hear from Schneider Electric, and we've also got product experts here at One Click LCA that you will hear from. So let's get started. First, we are going to hear from Coralie with Schneider Electric.
Hello everyone, my name is Coralie Vergez and I'm a Director of Partnering for Sustainability at Schneider Electric. I've been passionate about sustainability for the past 20 years and it's a real pleasure to be with you today for the 2025 Summer Sustainability Summit. Today, I would like to talk about a partnership we have been building between Schneider Electric and One Click LCA, and that I have been leading since April 2024 when we first met with Panu Passanen, One Click LCA's founder and CEO. Back then, Schneider Electric was about to launch its environmental data program, the result of 20 years of effort in making our environmental data available and accessible. As we talked with Panu Passanen, it became obvious that One Click would be a great ally to amplify our efforts in terms of accessibility. Indeed, we'd heard from our customers and partners that the lack of environmental data for electrical and mechanical products was a pain point for them. It was hindering their environmental impact assessments and reporting efforts, and it made it harder for them to reach a given voluntary sustainability standard or even regulations. As a company, Schneider is committed to walking the talk and bringing its customers along a responsible and impactful journey to sustainability. This involves reducing the environmental footprint of our value chain, our own operations, and the use phase of our products and solutions. And it also involves making sure the environmental data of our products and solutions is available and accessible. So to increase the accessibility of our data, we decided that we needed to put our information where our partners and customers needed it to be. So with One Click LCA and its 20 plus plugins, including Revit Autodesk and IES, we are able to go a step further in terms of accessibility. Now, we have more than 50,000 commercial references with transparent environmental data on One Click LCA, including EPD digitized data and product technical characteristics. And this number will keep growing. So what's the impact for you? And more broadly, the architecture, engineering, consulting industry? Well, ASA professionals leveraging One Click LCA now have access to 50,000 electrical equipment commercial references with environmental data. They can simply consult it, add it to their projects in building ACU tools, or import the data to other software partners through OCL's plugins. So this should help AEC professionals gain in efficiency and accuracy to meet sustainability standards, regulations, or goals. Now, the journey is only starting, and we'd love to hear from your feedback, as well as what you expect next. For example, what are the use cases where you need Schneider Electric product and solution data? Or how can we increase accessibility? We look forward to hearing from you through our contact page on One Click LCA or se.com so that we can build a sustainable future together. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you so much, Coralie. That is great news for decarbonization in the built environment. If you would like to learn more about the Schneider partnership, you can check the link that will be in the comments. And now I am delighted to be joined by Jessie Templeton, Varusha Venkatraj, and Kayleigh Abbott from Brightworks Sustainability. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Aileen. Great to be here.
Before we get started with our conversation today, I'd like to ask each of you to share a short introduction about yourself and your role at Brightworks with our audience today. So Jessie, let's start with you.
All right, thank you. First, I wanted to just start with Brightworks Sustainability and a little bit about our firm. We're a consulting sustainability firm, and we really focus on anything in the built environment having to do with energy or materials, carbon, ESG reporting. Our scope is very broad and includes also things like healthier built environments and biodiversity. I myself am the Embodied Carbon Lead at Brightworks Sustainability, where I help lead all of our services related to embodied carbon. This could be anything from a whole building life cycle assessment to embodied carbon reduction scopes at the project or programmatic level, and Scope 3 activity-based reporting for greenhouse gas emissions. My background is in architecture, where I focused on sustainable design, and I started and ran a firm's embodied carbon accounting program before coming to Brightworks.
Great, thank you for that. Vergez, let's go with you.
Yeah, so I am Varusha, Senior Materials Specialist at Brightworks. I'm also part of the materials practice and work on whole building lifecycle assessments and support firms achieve their carbon goals at a program level as well as a project level. My background is also in architecture, and I also completed my PhD in construction science, where I focused on the application of machine learning to forecast embodied carbon and operational carbon emissions. Yeah, glad to be here.
Great, thanks so much. And Kayleigh, over to you.
Yeah. I'm Kayleigh. I'm a material specialist at Brightworks. I work very closely with Varusha and Jessie. My background was in environmental engineering before I came to Brightworks, and previously I was working at an engineering and retro commissioning firm doing local law 97 audits throughout New York City. So been working in sustainability for a bit.
Great, thank you guys so much. Now let's move forward to our focus of today's roundtable discussion today, which is scaling decarbonization with EPDs. So I wanted to start with the first question, which is, you've been working on MEP assessments at Brightworks since 2023. What's driving this surge in interest from clients for EPDs in MEP systems, especially in sectors like data centers?
That's a great question. So data centers are amongst the most energy and carbon intensive building types. And within that, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems make up or account for 80% of the carbon emissions. In comparison, the structure and enclosure only account for 20% of the emissions. So there are a few reasons why MEP has such a big carbon footprint, but the main reason is that these systems are replaced multiple times throughout the building life cycle, and which means that the embodied carbon really adds up. And as a result, data center owners, including hyperscalers, are demanding greater transparency from their supply chains to meet their stringent net zero carbon goals. And they are really looking to decarbonize the supply chain even before robust data is available. And this is really where environmental product declarations are crucial, because they're third-party verified documents that allow for apple-to-apple type of comparisons of MEP equipment. And more recently, we're seeing that EPDs are no longer optional, and they're increasingly being built into procurement criteria. So it's no longer just like a nice to have, but rather just becoming a mandatory requirement. So if a supplier doesn't have an EPD, sometimes they're not even considered for the project. And there are also folks at the iMasons Climate Accord and other broader sustainability commitment programs that are trying to standardize how embodied carbon is being measured, reported, and reduced in digital infrastructure projects, and EPDs really play a crucial role in, helping us achieve this.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that. I think, looking at the challenges of data centers and that sector and the, transparency that they're looking for in EPDs leads nicely to the next question, which is about Scope 3 reporting. So I'd love it if you could expand more about Scope 3 reporting and the challenges of moving away from spend-based estimates, and then also what solutions have you seen clients approach to moving away from those spend-based estimates when they're trying to do more accurate and transparent Scope 3 reporting?
I can chat about this a little bit, especially because it does tie to data centers. A lot of those big tech companies are looking towards their Scope 3 because things like data centers often fall within their Scope 3 when you're not just talking about energy and Scope 1 and 2, which everyone knows. One of the reasons that they're trying to shift away from just spend-based or cost-based analysis for those Scope 3 emissions is because they want to take advantage of all the efforts that Varusha was just talking about when it comes to EPDs, on top of lower their emissions by requiring those EPDs in lower global warming potential products. So you're seeing a lot of LCA-based accounting instead of spend-based accounting, or at least trying to transition to that. It's still a bit of a bumpy path. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when you're talking about huge amounts of capital goods and services. You're talking about different real estate ventures, and you're seeing it in different sectors, not just big tech. But a lot of different companies are trying to say, how can we lower our emissions? And the first thing to do is to benchmark it, to keep track of it outside of just averages like spend-based. So LCAs are really helpful for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, when you get into things like doing an LCA, when you're digging deeper, there's often an assumption that sort of the more accurate data you get, you might find you have a bigger carbon footprint than you thought. But Brightworks has found that when you guys are using product-specific data, like EPDs, when you're doing a life cycle assessment, instead of just going with the generic averages, the reported emissions often come down. So can you share sort of why that happens and how it's changing the ways that your clients approach their embodied carbon reporting?
Sure. Happy to touch on this too. So we kind of refer to this as the green premium, basically the idea that you're spending more on a product that we know is better for the environment in some way. But if you're just using spend-based accounting, you now paying for that is adding to your carbon emissions and Scope 3 reporting instead of decreasing it, as we know those products should do. And when I talk about those green products, I'm talking about things that use recycled materials. They're maybe even upcycling things. They have different types of material sourcing that's happening, maybe even bio-based materials, which we love to see. All of these things we know inherently should decrease the embodied carbon of a product, but you might have to pay for that additional manufacturing or some kind of new manufacturing that's happening along the way. So that's why you're seeing those upfront costs. And then if you're just doing spend-based accounting, you're now adding to your carbon instead of that. So we see that if you actually get a life cycle assessment done, if you get a product-specific EPD, then you'll see those emissions decrease in the way that we know they should decrease. And we're talking from the standpoint of doing whole building life cycle assessments all the time, but you can see it through anywhere a part of capital goods and services. So we're talking about concrete and steel, but we've also seen it for interior projects, especially carpets is a huge one. But we've seen it all the way down to things like printer paper, of if you're using recycled paper or not, you're paying for it more. But how can we now take advantage of a company that's buying 1,000 pounds of printer paper every year and would like to lower those emissions? So there's a lot of conversation about it, a lot more EPDs that need to be created, and a lot more of any kind of accounting systems, especially when you do get down to the nitty-gritty things and other kind of capital expenditures. But we're always very excited when clients of any sector want to have this conversation about Scope 3.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it's also great to hear that you're finding more transparent data is good data. It's bringing your clients the results that they're looking for, which is a lower carbon footprint. And if you're measuring everything more accurately, you'll get that good news for your clients. So that's great to hear. I'd also like to, you guys talked about sort of scope 3 and the demand for more transparent data with EPDs. Some of this is driven by market demand, but I know that some of this is also driven by policy. We don't have quite as many policies in North America as they have in Europe. But how is policy affecting your work? Policies like Cal Green or the California Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, which we expect to see that having some big effects in the coming years. But how is that affecting your work today?
Yeah. So policy is really starting to shape the way that we work. It's no longer about, designing great buildings, but a lot of folks are also starting to focus on the carbon accounting side of things. And several policies at a state and national level have come in place. And these policies are beginning to mandate embodied carbon reporting. And in some cases, they also set embodied carbon limits for new construction as well as renovation projects. So this is really pushing the industry to bake in whole building LCA earlier into the design process. So then we're really able to influence these design and procurement changes. So as you mentioned, the one policy that stands out to me is definitely Cal Green, which went into effect July of last year. And this requirement basically applies to all large-scale non-residential projects that are over 100,000 square feet. And they basically have two different pathways. The first one is the prescriptive path, which is more about having EPDs and setting carbon limits. And then the second approach is the prescriptive path, in which you show like a 10% reduction from the baseline design. And then I think Jessie has something to add on here.
Yeah, I will add as well that there is a reuse pathway. So there's the reuse pathway, the whole building LCA pathway, and the prescriptive pathway. But in general, how this has affected our work, we really have been playing a role in educating a lot of our clients this last year and walking through what these options are, how they can align with their other goals, whether that's a certification system or general overall programmatic goals, and then how to implement and how that changes their workflow. Generally, with Cal Green, I will say that relatively, these are fairly easy to achieve. They're not as onerous as something like the LEED credits, and they really are providing an opportunity, again, for learning and educating and setting people on the path. That's what it's trying to do, and incrementally it will increase how difficult it becomes. I think with other policy that's coming into effect as well. Similarly, we're finding that we're playing a big role in educating and then helping companies set up for understanding how they're going to procure these lower carbon materials, or just benchmarking where they are and how to reach the policy mandates or comply with the policy mandates.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. I'm going to go a little further into this question because a few things are either new or on the horizon. LEED V5 was recently officially launched, and there is an embodied carbon reduction component that is now required for LEED certification. And then also, again, touching on the, California Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, which is not fully implemented, but is likely to affect companies outside of California because it affects large companies that do business in California. Do you see more changes like that coming when you're talking to your clients, or you are thinking about the future, do you see this as a trend and a shift towards more embodied carbon reporting, and then the requirement will be for more and more EPDs? What are your thoughts on that?
I think generally, yes, this is very much a trend. We're seeing conversations occur around the country. There's activity, a lot of activity in Boston and New York and Seattle, um, everything from code provisions to legislation. And I think there has been a slight setback with our current administration, but the activity is still very much there. And I don't see it going away. I certainly see it increasing. Another piece of this that I find interesting is that many companies that have started to catch wind and understand this policy that is coming down the pipeline, whether it's here or not yet, they are choosing to proactively engage and implement because they, A, see it as the right thing to do, or B, know that at some point they will have to comply.
Yeah, I might piggyback off that too and say that education that we're trying to implement is exactly what they're trying to get ahead of also. And so education often comes down to the architects they usually go to or the contractors that they usually use, making sure that everyone knows what the word or the acronym EPD actually means, or if we were to ever use HPDs or anything else like that. Getting ahead of just that knowledge base is very valuable, even if you're not implementing any kind of global warming potential limits or EPD requirements.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we find the same thing at One Click LCA. There's so much education that's part of it. This is, fairly new focus, new trends. Definitely educating the sector is very important. Speaking about sort of education or advice that you would give, what advice would you have for an AEC professional who is trying to get ahead of the curve, trying to specify lower carbon products, but they're working with manufacturers who don't have EPDs, or like you say, maybe don't even know what EPD stands for? How can those AEC professionals help move the supply chain forward?
Overall, this is really about advocacy. We know that advocacy works. Yes, it takes many voices, but we've seen how we might ask for an EPD from a manufacturer, and then we come back 6 months later and they've had 10 other inquiries. So now they're starting to pursue that pathway. Another solution that we've seen be really successful is owners asking for EPDs to be provided by the end of construction. So if they're engaged early with a manufacturer, they say, hey, we really want to use your product and we would really love to have an EPD. Is it feasible for you to create an EPD by the end of construction? We've seen this specifically on multiple GSA projects where the GSA IRA low embodied carbon requirements for things like concrete and steel and glass, they absolutely require an EPD. But many of these projects are in remote locations where maybe a ready mix supplier is not familiar at all with environmental product declarations or lower carbon concrete options. And through education and collaboration with the contractor and the project team and education, again, these concrete suppliers, these ready mix suppliers have been able to create EPDs that then have been used on the project. And so that is a huge piece. Another thing is trying to band together to advocate. So iMason's Climate Accord was mentioned earlier, and this is a place where many big tech companies that are involved with data centers are trying to move the market. And for example, they created a letter to manufacturers asking for EPDs. And that is a very powerful voice when you think about all of those large tech companies coming together. But even on a more local scale, I think if you're an architect and you know that there are other firms in your area that care about this, writing a letter from 10 of you to a manufacturer is a really effective way of letting them know there's interest and desire for environmental product declarations. I would also say, as you're challenged to create EPDs and find EPDs, you can also pursue other strategies simultaneously for embodied carbon reduction. So things like stepping back to the beginning of design and understanding where there can be efficiencies, or you can compare different systems, even at that high level, even if you're using generic data, it helps you understand, there are multiple levels or multiple tiers where we can affect embodied carbon and help pursue meaningful reduction.
It sounds like, a lot of the advice that you're giving speaks to something that we see a lot, which is sort of the whole sector needs to work together. AEC professionals can help manufacturers with their EPD process, and manufacturers having EPDs can help, AEC professionals perform more accurate life cycle assessments. So we're all in this together, and I especially liked the idea of the sort of joint power of, getting together with different companies in your sector and, like you say, writing a letter, demanding something together always has a bigger impact than one person alone. So that is really, really great advice. Now, going a little bit away from the topic of just EPDs, but now talking about sort of materials and what we can do with them beyond just producing and using low carbon materials in the first place. Jessie, you've talked about the idea of treating buildings as material banks. And that's something that you see as key to advancing circularity. How does using a life cycle assessment help quantify the reuse potential and guide those smarter material choices for future deconstruction?
Yeah, so generally we know that one of the greatest values of life cycle assessments is that they give us data to understand the impact or the value of different strategies or of different materials. So we often use life cycle assessments with projects that are reusing a portion of the shell or the structure, and we can understand that that provides a great value in reduction. For a few projects, we've seen as much as a 40% reduction just by using the shell and the structure, even with, a full fit out of interiors and site, etc. So this is a really important avenue for reducing embodied carbon. Similarly, with any salvage or materials that you're able to implement into a project and reuse, we can understand the value through the life cycle assessment. So it might not have an EPD, but we know that, reusing precast panels, for example, one of our projects was trying to use precast cladding panels from an older building and re-implement that. That's a material that does not have to be manufactured, can be directly reapplied, and therefore you're not using that embodied carbon or releasing new embodied carbon. Similarly, we've been getting a lot of requests lately to understand the value of deconstruction versus demolition. And this has allowed us to look at all of the valuable materials that are in our existing buildings, and if we can reuse them on the site of whatever is being built, we reduce transportation costs and we get the value of reusing those materials in that new building. But even if those materials are then salvaged, they go to an off-site second use store or directly to another project, there are huge savings, again, in that product not having to be remanufactured, and that another project can take advantage of that reused material. So overall, it just helps us to understand. It allows us to make informed decisions based on data, which is really important.
Yeah, thanks for that. Informed decisions based on data. I think that is a sort of key phrase that can sum up basically our whole conversation and where we see the industry headed. So thank you all so much for your, for sharing your knowledge today and what you see happening in the industry. I'd like to take the last few minutes and just go around the room and get any final thoughts on the topic of EPDs or material reuse, circularity, life cycle assessment that you would like to share with the audience. Kayleigh, let's start with you.
Sure. I often kind of talk about strategies with clients. It's so funny how that it always almost comes back to reduce, reuse, recycle for me, what we were taught when we were in third grade or something of that. Reduce the quantities, reuse what you can, and then recycle it at the end of life also. And so EPDs can fit into any of those, and it's a more nuanced strategy, I would say. But it's all important when the ultimate goal is to reduce embodied carbon. And so having, once again, this data, but also having these strategies and these different design alternatives are all really helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. And Vergez, let's go with you.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting to see the momentum in the industry where, more EPDs are getting published, especially in the MEP space. So it gives me confidence that we're all headed in the right direction. We're all pushing that change that we want to see, and I'm excited about the future.
I love a good hopeful note at the end of every session. And Jessie, let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, just thinking about everything we've been talking about, something that comes to mind is the scope of assessments. So Varsha was talking about MEP, and we were talking about, activity-based reporting for greenhouse gas emissions, but thinking about what we include in our scopes of assessing. And I think any assessment should be applauded, whether it's kind of a smaller scope that's just structure and enclosure, um, maybe to meet a lead requirement or some other requirement, or looking at things like furniture and MEP. The more we assess, the more we can understand and make meaningful change, which is one of the reasons we've been focusing on MEP, since we know that that's a pretty big chunk of a project. But yeah, just thinking about or encouraging folks to look at a broader picture of what the impacts are. So including more categories in your assessments to truly understand where you can create the most embodied carbon reduction.
Great, thank you. Well, once again, thank you all for such an excellent discussion. Really happy to hear all of your viewpoints, and I appreciate your time. So, thank you guys very much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Aileen. That was a very interesting talk. If you've missed the previous sessions, I'm Steven from Product Marketing at One Click LCA, and I'm going to talk to you about something new that we are launching that's going to make One Click LCA even better. Across the built environment, one shift is clear. Carbon data is now a business-critical requirement. It impacts permitting, procurement, and credibility. In our 2025 Carbon Experts report, 83% of AEC professionals confirmed that environmental product declarations influence their material choices. At the same time, over 60% have already achieved embodied carbon reductions using LCA insights. But many still face data quality issues, fragmented EPD availability, and resource bottleneck. That's what we address with the One Click LCA Power Pack. For designers, engineers, and consultants, carbon performance is increasingly tied to project success, but poor quality LCA data remains a risk. One Click LCA's Power Pack for construction professionals solves this in 3 ways. First, AI-backed plausibility checking and internal verification workflows reduce the risk by ensuring your LCAs meet the required quality and consistently. Second, Carbon Designer 3D's generative design and the LCA chat assistant give early-stage carbon feedback instantly, supporting informed trade-offs during design. Third, automated reporting templates enable the delivery of branded certification-ready results in minutes, saving significant time and reducing review cycles. Manufacturers face a surge in EPD demand, especially in Europe, the UK, and North America. Yet, 81% of surveyed manufacturers identify the complexity and cost of EPD creation and verification as a top barrier. One Click LCA's Power Pack for manufacturing and EPD professionals enables you to run pre-verification with our EPD quality checker to catch compliance issues early. It allows you to manage multi-site operations through centralized data inputs, allowing you to generate unlimited project-specific EPDs. And third, it allows you to export globally relevant branded EPD reports in multiple languages, supporting both compliance and client trust. From the EU's construction product regulation to buy clean mandates in North America, the carbon requirements in the UK, policy is converging on one thing: verifiable whole life carbon data. The Energy Performance of Building Directive mandates embodied carbon reporting in 2028. France RE 2020, Denmark and Finland are already enforcing caps. And over 90% of manufacturers expect regulatory pressure to increase. This is not a future problem, it's here now. Automation, high-quality data, and credible verification are the only scalable responses. To close the gap between intent and implementation, the sector needs to scale, and scale requires automation. One Click LCA's Power Pack exists to make this possible with the tools built for your workflows, compliance frameworks, and business pressures. If you want to learn more about the benefits of One Click LCA Power Pack, click on the link in the comments. Over to you, Eileen.
And now I am joined by Rachelle Habchi, who is the Low Carbon Products Lead at the Carbon Leadership Forum. And today she is going to be telling us a little bit more about the Carbon Leadership Forum's Materials Baselines Report. So Rachelle, before you jump into your presentation, I'd love it if you could tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm Rachelle. I was working as a structural engineer for about 7.5 to 8 years. I recently transitioned to the Carbon Leadership Forum as a low carbon product lead. I was director of sustainability for a bit at my previous firm, and then I had the opportunity to transition to CLF and work specifically on low carbon products. I also am currently the chair of the SEOSC Sustainability Design Committee, and I am currently one of the co-leads for one of the hubs of CLF, which is the Los Angeles hub. So I'm going to get into my presentation on EPDs and how we use them at CLF. But first I want to get into a little bit of definitions. Because in the sustainability sphere, there's a lot of abbreviations for a lot of different types of things, and it can get a little bit confusing at first. So just at a high level, an LCA is an abbreviation for a life cycle assessment, which measures and tracks the greenhouse gas emissions of a product, a building, something over its life cycle. Whole building LCA is a distinction relating to the scope or what is included in an LCA, which we will get to in greater detail. The abbreviation EPD stands for Environmental Product Declaration. These assess greenhouse gas emissions from a product to distill the environmental impact into a global warming potential. And global warming potential is most commonly measured in kilograms of CO2 equivalents. It is also informally known as embodied carbon. So what are EPDs? EPDs summarize the different environmental impacts associated with the products that make up our buildings. So EPDs look very similar to nutrition labels, as you can see here on the left, the nutrition label. And if you were to follow through with that metaphor, the GWP, which is boxed in red here, could be compared to calories. Just like a nutrition label, there are other impact categories listed in EPDs, and they are important to track. So you see here below GWP, there's ozone depletion potential, acidification potential, eutrophication potential. Those are really important to track as well. But for the purposes of policy and typical measurement of, specifically embodied carbon, we'll be focusing on GWP. All right, so EPDs measure cradle-to-gate emissions, or the emissions associated with the product stage of a material's life. So from the time of raw material extraction through the time that the material leaves the factory gates. And that is represented here in the burnt red portion, the product stage, which is A1 through A3. Whereas when you compare that to a project LCA, that would be the entire scope from A1 to C4. EPDs can be used as building blocks to whole building life cycle assessments, and should be, can and hopefully are being used as building blocks. There are two broad types of EPDs. There are industry average EPDs. They represent products from many manufacturers across an industry or sector. And then there are those that represent a single manufacturer, sometimes called manufacturer specific, and sometimes other names, but we're going to go with manufacturer specific for this presentation. So manufacturer specific EPDs are sometimes further differentiated as facility specific versus manufacturer average. And then when it's facility specific, that EPD represents the emissions associated with a manufacturer's single facility, or when it's manufacturer average, it's the average across multiple facilities. And industry average EPDs are developed by industry organizations. So that could be NRMCA for concrete or AISC for steel. They collect data from their constituents and they share the average impacts associated with various materials. Whereas product or factory specific EPDs or manufacturer specific EPDs are published by the individual manufacturers for their specific products. And you'll see later on when I talk about the new wood EPDs, what it means for it to be a manufacturer-specific EPD. And it's this is an important distinction because with policies, like for example for CalGreen, the affected materials specified on your project, if you were to if you were to comply using the prescriptive path, they will need to have product or factory specific EPDs. All right, so what is the CLF Material Baselines Report? So the CLF Material Baselines Report represents an estimate of industry average greenhouse gas emissions for construction materials manufactured in North America. So taking a very short trip down memory lane, the first CLF Material Baselines report was developed in 2019. It was 3 pages. And it was developed to explicitly support the EC3 tool, which launched in November of that year. And since then, and we've been publishing every 2 years. Our last published report was in 2023, and we are currently expected to publish very soon the 2025 report. Since then, since 2019, the Material Baselines Report still aims to serve those initial purposes, but has also expanded beyond the sole explicit focus of being used in EC3. And now it's being used to a number of different audiences, a number of different types of people in the industry, and that ranges from specifiers to owners and then to policymakers as well. And I think that really highlights why EPDs are so important for the industry and why the increased availability of EPDs is so important to keep moving our industry forward. So the CLF Material Baselines Report, I think one of the most powerful things that the report does, especially from a previous engineer's perspective, is that it consolidates all major construction materials and their industry average GWP values into one report. So it provides additional info, and then addition to that, as you see here in the snapshot, it provides additional information on each construction material based on the current state of EPDs. And I think it's so valuable because you have one source, one report that you go to. A lot of times what we really try to do is if there are already industry average EPDs available, we will adopt those values as our baselines so that there is not a lot of confusion. And then if there are not industry average EPDs available, which we will talk about in a little bit, then we try to see is there enough data that we could provide a CLF baseline based off of our analysis. So what are we exploring for the 2025 CLF Material Baselines Report? As you can see, I think we're really expanding the number of baselines that we're providing in this report. And I'm really, really excited about it, especially as a previous practicing engineer. I think it's so important and so great that there are additional EPDs available to be able to make these decisions. One of the things I'm really excited about is high strength concrete. and the possibility of including that as well as shotcrete. I'm really excited about the possibility of also including wood, specifically CLT. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, as well as insulation. And we are also looking into including asphalt roof shingles, fireproofing, acoustic ceiling tiles. It's really, I think it's going to be a large expansion from the 2023 baselines report. All right, so going into wood and mass timber, for CLT, there's currently one applicable North American industry-wide EPD, or industry average EPD, excuse me, and it is in British Columbia, which is great. It's so great that that exists. But also it is necessary for an industry average EPD to exist within North America, or at least in the United States, or regionally specific in the United States and other parts of Canada where CLT is produced and manufactured. So CLT was considered a high priority material due to the lack of industry average EPDs. And what was so nice was that the majority of major CLT North American plants have EPDs. They have taken the time to produce these EPDs, and because they have taken that time to produce these EPDs, we were able to take a look at the data and hopefully provide a baseline. So there was a number of ways in which we tried to look at how would we be able to provide a baseline for CLT. And the one I think that we kind of have settled on is exploring CLF regionally specific CLT baselines. And so that kind of aligns with the new regionally specific sawn lumber EPDs that were produced. So we would split it up based off of production in Eastern Canada. There already is one in British Columbia, so we will adopt the industry average EPD in British Columbia. US Southern, and then US Inland, Northwest, and the Pacific Coast. And then for mass plywood panel and dowel laminated timber, abbreviated as MPP and DLT. For anybody that doesn't know what these things are, they serve similar functions to CLT in that they are both prefabricated engineered wood panels. It's just what they're made of is slightly different, pretty different. MPP is composed of just multiple thin wood veneers bonded with resin adhesives. And DLT is manufactured from dimension lumber, as you can see here in the picture below. And they're friction fit together with hardwood dowels, it's a pretty cool invention. Again, they also have, it's great that they have EPDs as well. They have manufacturer specific EPDs. The vast majority, if not the entirety of MPP in North America is produced at a single plant in Oregon. The plant is called Ferris Lumber Company. And for DLT, StructureCraft is the lone DLT producer in North America, or at the very least, represents the vast majority of DLT production in North America. Because that they have EPDs, we are considering using their values in their EPDs as our baselines for the CLF baseline report. All right, so going into ready mix concrete, specifically high strength concrete, because NRMCA has already done a great job of producing industry average EPDs for compressive strengths from 2,500 psi to 8,000 psi. So what we are defining as high strength concrete for the purposes of the CLF material baselines report is concrete strength mixes greater than 8,000 psi. So that means 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, and 12,000. Currently, there are no industry-wide EPDs for concrete mixes greater than 8,000 psi, but yet there's a consistent demand for high-strength concrete mixes. And as a previously practicing engineer, it was kind of frustrating that I was specifying high-strength concrete mixes greater than 8,000 psi, but I didn't know what the carbon emissions associated with that meant because there was no industry average EPD. So we took a look at EPD data from EC3 for high strength concrete, and it was interesting in that it didn't necessarily follow the trajectory of what the values are from 2,500 to 8,000 psi, and it gave a lot of food for thought for what we could produce as a baseline for these higher strength concrete mixes. All right, and then ending this off with CLF baselines and policy and building code and why it's important. So the past couple of years, it has seen an explosion of policy and building code with regards to embodied carbon. Baselines are important to provide the current state of the industry, and baselines are being used for reference in policy. And we see that for GWP limits for code in the state of Washington and IBC update efforts. And we see that continuing forward, moving on, because it really is a very easily consolidated report that takes into account already, we adopt industry average EPD values as our baselines where possible, and then it provides additional information where that data is not available. And with LEED, the latest version of LEED includes one requirement and one credit focused on embodied carbon. And that current language references the CLF material baselines report as a source for industry average DWP values per product type, which is really exciting. It's great to see that work being referenced. And yeah. So again, and also in addition to that, EPDs and these GWP limits and the material baselines report, they're all important, and it is seen in the policy that was passed in California with Cal Green and the Cal Green embodied carbon options. Just a quick view of that. There are 3 compliance pathways. They are applicable for non-residential buildings over 100,000 square feet and schools over 50,000 square feet. Out of the 3 compliance pathways, one of them is a prescriptive pathway, and it is required for steel, insulation, flat glass, and ready-mix concrete. Currently, there is an astronomical mandatory limit of 175% of industry-wide EPD GWP limits. But then it also gives options, and I think that's great for Tier 1 and Tier 2, where you can adopt, municipalities or local cities can adopt these tiers which require compliance at lower GWP limits. Like Tier 1 is 150% and Tier 2 is 100%, which is great. All right, and then just a quick overview of the Cal Green material list. There's ready-mix concrete, different types of steel, flat glass, and insulation. And again, just finishing off with, if you go with the prescriptive pathway, which requires EPDs, you just have to meet the 175% of industry average GWP. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. Really insightful. It's really interesting to see how the EPD space has come so far since 2019, when your first materials baselines report was much shorter, and now you have a lot more data. Really excited to see all the data that's going to be in the 2025 report when it's officially published. I do have a question though. We have in our audience today, we have a lot of manufacturers of low carbon materials, and we also have a lot of AEC professionals. So one big takeaway from your presentation is that although the industry is moving forward and we have more data, it sounds like even more is needed. You still want to see more of these EPDs for more of these products. What is something that AEC professionals can do to support that and move the industry forward?
Yeah, 100%. I think policy is really important. So requiring EPDs in policy, I think, moves the industry forward. But in addition to that, I think specifiers, engineers, and architects requiring and updating their specifications so it requires EPDs is really important. And so I think that will kind of catalyze the addition of EPDs in the market. It starts to become kind of a normal thing. And when you already have the EPD requirement in your specifications, when it goes to bid, whoever is bidding will understand from the very beginning that they have to take into account manufacturers or products that have industry average EPDs or whatever it is that have EPDs. And I think that will help push the inclusion of EPDs in the industry as just like a typical thing. And so I think it's really important for manufacturers to look at being able to produce EPDs. And the more manufacturers that produce EPDs, the more accurate the industry average EPDs are going to be. So yeah, I think it's really important if they're able to produce it. For example, for MPP and DLT, we were able to take a look and see like if we could produce a CLF baseline value for those product types. And we could only do that because those manufacturers had manufacturer specific EPDs. So I think it's really important moving the industry forward.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Just like anything, you can't reduce it until you've measured it, and you have to start measuring it with that EPD. It's also exciting. You mentioned LEED V5 that was just recently made official, and there's going to be EPD and embodied carbon requirements in that new certification scheme. So really looking forward to that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rachelle. Thanks for such an insightful presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
And now we're going to hear from Nick Galardi, who is an EPD expert at One Click LCA, and he's going to be showing you the EPD generator.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Galardi. I am a consultant at One Click LCA, and today I'm going to show you how easily we can create an EPD using One Click LCA. So right now I'm in the One Click LCA software. So right now what I'm going to do is going to start adding a project. For now I'm just going to add one of those products. And now it's creating a project product page. I can start entering information. Today I'm going to start making some steel rebar. I'm going to enter in my specific license key that I need to use for today. Yours will automatically pop up into here, or it would be the first selection. I'm going to find whichever product type that my product happens to fit in. I'm going to find metal-based products. And this country right here, this helps the search engine populate data points within that region first, the neighboring countries second, and then ultimately generic or other regions a third. So this will put a priority on whichever country that you select first, and that'll set it throughout kind of the data whenever you search throughout this project. I can upload an image here, so when we were back on that main page, within those project tiles, there was a certain image that popped up. I can certainly add one. If not, that's certainly okay as well. Now it has, I've created and finalized my project. It has now put me into my project homepage. And within my project, I can create many different designs or many different models, limitless nearly. So with that, I'm going to hit get started. It's going to ask me which tool that I want to select. Today, I am going to select the V3 tool, which is our latest tool aligned to EPD Hub. I mentioned that I'm going to be working with steel rebar. I'm going to re-input that name here. Maybe it has a specific SKU or name that we're calling it. So I'm going to call this one number 1 for today, since it's my first product. I happen to be based in Seattle. For North American standards, we happen to follow the ISO 21930 standard. For today, and with that ISO 21930 standard, the bare minimum that we would need to create is a cradle to gate model. So that is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to select that. Hit OK. If I wanted to change anything about that selection that I just made, I can re-click the steel rebar name of the model that I just created. I can hit modify. It'll take me back to that editing page. Likewise, for this overall project, I can hit modify, or more actions, and then modify. It'll take me back to that editing page for the overall project. I want to highlight and go into the model. The way that we can do that is by clicking the Input Data section. When we click the Input Data section, we're going to see a couple of different areas for us to be able to input our data. We're going to see places like the product description and declared unit that is going to be more textually based. So we're going to be inputting that information. And then we have materials all the way to end of life, which is more LCA model or quantitatively based inputs for this model. And then following that, we're going to have more textual inputs with the EPD description, the background report, and then the EPD generation as well. So for now, I'm going to focus on the quantitative or kind of the model of this, since the textual will be based around kind of your product, your company, and who you are, and what you're also trying to do with this model as well. So now I am in one of my designs, I'm in one of my models, and I'm in the first section, which is my manufacturing materials, or my A1 section. So this is going to be all those materials for my rebar that's going to be coming into the facility before I do anything to it just yet. So that's pretty much just going to be raw steel that I'm getting into my facility, let's just say. So I'm just getting a big block of steel. So let me find that raw virgin block of steel. As I mentioned before, I happen to be based in Seattle. Let's just say my manufacturing plant happens to be based in Seattle. I can't find a specific US or even a US neighboring country data point. So I'm going to go with the next best, which is a world average. So that is what I'm going to select. Every LCA model and every EPD is based off of a certain amount when it comes to this model. We can put anything into this model, but in order for us to have a little bit of control and also some flexibility and feasibility for others to be able to use this type of data, we need to base it off of what's called a declared unit, or a certain standardized size, so that when we send off this data about the rebar and a builder or a contractor or an architect is looking at this data, they want to be able to scale it up or down for their needs so that they can understand with their projects how much environmental carbon or environmental impacts are being caused by this one product or multiple products. And it's easy for them to scale up those numbers in whichever fashion that they need it to, because of that declared unit. So what I typically recommend is whatever you end up selling quantitatively wise to those architects or your clients, really, at the end of the day, that's what I want that declared unit to be in. So for example, rebar may be sold by the kilogram. So for that case, I think it is best that our declared unit is also in a kilogram fashion as well. So now that we have that knowledge, I'm going to take that and we're going to input, since I happen to know the exact quantity that is going into 1 kilogram of rebar. It's going to be 1 kilogram of steel. Now, since I'm going to be kind of twisting this rebar, I'm going to be shaping it, I'm going to be cutting it to size for my client as well. There is going to be some production losses because I'm going to have these shavings. I'm going to be losing some of this material. So I can input, if my engineers or my product team happens to know the exact percentage loss, I can input that into here. So let's say it happens to be 5%. I'm going to input that into here. And then with this, I can also balance out any of the biogenic carbon that happens to be a part of this product, or any of the energy as well. I won't focus on that today, since it certainly depends on how far that we are taking this model to. But that option is there, and that helps ease kind of anything that we may need to do, and it consolidates it into those drop-down selections. So now that I have my 5% production losses on top of my 1 kilogram of steel that's coming in, I'm going to think about kind of the packaging that my rebar needs to go on top of. And I happen to know that it's just a pallet. So that is what I'm going to find. I'm going to find my pallet data point. And I'm going to, again, find that only the world one is available. So I'm going to select that. Now, I would need to do some math in order for me to find out, okay, how much does my pallet weigh, my full entire pallet? That's what it's asking for this mass per unit. So most typically, we're sitting around 25 kilograms for every pallet in our facility. Now, for every kilogram of rebar, we're not using a full-on pallet. So we may need to do some calculations, but let's say it's a very tiny fraction of a pallet that is being used to transport our 1 kilogram of rebar. So that is what I have right there. We can have our ancillary materials as well. Let's say at my shop, we're going to have a lubricating oil. So that's what I'm going to look for. Maybe this lubricating oil is for the machinery in my place of production. And that is also going to be very tiny in comparison to how much steel that we are producing. So I can make some notes here. This is some oil. This classifications is going to help in my results page so that I can be able to see the data in a very granular way. Maybe I didn't want to name that pallet. Maybe I wanted to name that packaging instead. And then same with this, my raw material. Now, if you notice with every single one of these data points, there's some information to the right of this that we can input. So for example, for my steel rebar, we can input the transportation that's associated with this. So maybe this happens to be only trucked to my facility. So the default is a lorry, which in British English is a truck. And this happens to be a truck that's can carry over 32 metric tons. So for this case, I'm going to say that it happens to be transported 200 kilometers. For my pallet, this is from my supplier to my facility. Say that happens to be a little bit closer at 50 kilometers. And let's say for that lubricating oil, we can get that at a local shop. So maybe that's around 20 kilometers for this product. And now I'm going to move on to the manufacturing side of it all. So those are my manufacturing materials, my ancillary materials, packaging materials that are going into this. Now this is my manufacturing stage. This is going to be also things that are going to be inputted into my process and things that are coming out of this process as well. So I mentioned before, I'm going to be doing the cutting, the bending, the shaping of my rebar. And that's all done through machines that are powered with electricity. So I'm going to review my electricity bill. And I'm going to review kind of what those machines, kind of what is the voltage that they need to be powered up. Let's say they happen to be over 1 kilovolt to be powered for these machines. I know that the data point name happens to be called medium voltage. I happen to be based in Seattle, so I can actually use one of these country filters since it's looking like there is quite a lot of these data points here. And I can use these to narrow my search down. So I'm going to select the country. Yes, I am in the US, but really I want to find if there's any Washington related electricity data points. So I'm going to go electricity. Let's say I can't spell too well, so I'm going to shorten all those words of electricity medium voltage. I'm going to open up that selection right there, and we're going to find that there happens to be one particular data point that has kind of the Western US energy grid. So I'm going to select that data point. And after kind of knowing my electricity bill and knowing how much amount of product I created, and maybe I happen to arrive on this number, this many kilowatt hours per every kilogram of steel rebar that is made. And I can certainly input information about my manufacturing waste if I wanted to, but I'm going to skip over that for now, and I'm going to save this, and we're going to jump into the results to see what this information provides to me at the end of the day. So I'm going to jump into that results page. And we can see that we have a couple of different results categories. So depending on which region you are in, this information is going to be valuable to you. So I'm going to look at the plus A2 standard, happens to be prevalent in Europe. And we can see for every kilogram of rebar that we are making throughout this life cycle that we inputted, the global warming potential, or the kilograms of CO2 equivalents, is about 1.87 for every kilogram of steel rebar. More so, we can be able to look at our model and be able to check a few items. Maybe we had more than the A1 to A3 inputs, and we can look at the mass balance. Are things balanced correctly? Do the inputs equal the outputs? Is mass conserved in this model? More so, as I was inputting some of those classifications, we can see, this is how it looks in this top right graph right here. Let's say I knew for my rebar, the steel was going to be the biggest impact. So I can be able to detoggle that, and I can be able to look at, okay, what else should I focus on? And it looks like the energy is something that I need to focus on. Maybe I install solar panels, maybe I move my manufacturing facility, whatever happens to be more cost effective, while also driving down this embodied carbon. So since we're putting in a lot of information, we can get a lot of information out of it. Even more so, we've designed the software to make it easy to generate anything out of this. So whether that is your EPD as a Word document, so you've gone through the model, you've inputted all that textual information, now we made it easy so it spits it out into a formalized Word document that is appropriate for EPD submissions. We can also generate this in a few other languages. You can download the digital file to this model. And more so, you can also digitally submit this to a program operator, and this will link the digital file. This will also send them a copy of your EPD Word document, and that's all done in a single click of a button. So that is how easy it is to input your information, get an EPD out of this, be able to edit that Word document, submit that for verification, and at the end of the day, get a third-party reviewed EPD. I'm Nick Galardi at One Click LCA. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nick, for that excellent presentation. It's always great to see the tools in action. And now we've been talking a lot today about EPDs and how they are one of the really key tools that we have to measure and reduce our carbon impact. If you are an AEC professional and you are looking to measure your impact either by using EPDs or performing a life cycle assessment, or if you're a manufacturer and you want to create an EPD and gain that competitive advantage, we'd love to hear from you. In just a moment, you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen. And if you would like to schedule a free consultation with a One Click LCA expert, please click yes. If you indicate your interest by clicking yes, we will reach out to you and we will schedule a free consultation where we can talk about your company's needs, your organization's needs, and find ways to help you decarbonize. And that is a wrap. Thank you so much for joining this year's Sustainability Summit. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. And if you missed any of today's sessions, they will all be available as recordings, so please do watch those. Thanks so much and have a great day.